never take for granted the art of production. I am stepping in for Gregarious, who is in a meeting that is running long, so I am kicking us off here. John, hello.
Hey, Brian. The high point of the week has arrived.
Can you know what? It just seems like we talk. I can't even believe how fast these things go.
It's like a slideshow. You know, we've lost all sense of normal analog time.
I was just thinking that as I was getting on the call, that I promised we'd set up a meeting in between the last session, and here we are, another Thursday.
Right, exactly. Pretty soon it'll be another birthday.
True, very true. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to Intersections. It is a pleasure to have you here. So allow me to set the stage for the show, and then I'll introduce my co-host John. We'll bring on our first guest. But before we get things going, again, welcome. Also, this is a live show, so you play a role in the show. So we would love to hear from you where you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear your questions and comments based on the conversation. We always welcome your feedback. So please share in real time, and we'll make sure to either share your comments and questions or where you're calling in from on screen and or for our guests. We'll do our best to get there. So welcome. Intersections is a weekly conversational jam session that dives deep into the intersections among technology, innovation, culture, and ideas. We bring together diverse personalities and worldviews together in the service of greater understanding and unlearning. Since we last spoke, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have become Super Bowl champions. Tom Brady is at seven rings? 7 rings now. Incredible. This show is, well, I know for John and I, it's the highlight of our week, and we hope it is for you as well. We leave every episode much more informed and much more inspired. And with that, I'd love to introduce my co-host, John. He's a thought leader. He's an entrepreneur. He's an advisor. He's a world-class musician and composer. He is a Tony-nominated producer of film and stage. He wrote the best-selling book, Jamming, The Art and Discipline of Business Creativity. He's one of the world's foremost experts in innovation. He's taught at Harvard Business School, served as visiting faculty at the MIT Media Lab and also Stanford, and he chairs the Institute for Large-Scale Innovation. Aside from that, John's a friend. We've learned a lot together. We've come on this journey together throughout the pandemic with this show, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to have met him, to work with him, and to be his friend. John, welcome.
Hey, Brian. So let me reciprocate by saying that it's a real privilege to be your partner in this enterprise, and that as we explore the horizons of innovation and all of the intersections with culture, technology, and the human equation as it's being redefined in the 21st century, you know, having you as my kind of ropes partner as we kind of ascend the rock face here couldn't be better. Brian has an amazingly eclectic background that kind of, in a way, docks very nicely with my completely nonlinear course. He's been digital before digital was not even fashionable but visible, and has applied it in the fields of innovation and marketing. Social media, to say nothing of his presence as an author, as a speaker, as a thought leader in these areas. And in addition to all that, he even has a day job, which is being the global evangelist for innovation at Salesforce. So, Brian, here we are.
There we are. Thank you. Thank you for that. And everybody, thank you. Please do let us know where you're tuning in from. Share your questions. Well, let's bring up our first guest, who we have maybe about 22 minutes with maximum. His name is Paul Greenberg. And I actually, Paul, I'm going to introduce you real quick, and then we'll officially start firing questions at you. I met Paul Greenberg. This is a great story. I met Paul Greenberg from another friend of ours who's named Paul Greenberg.
Paul Greenberg.
which is amazing. Well, Paul is a best-selling American author. He's focused on ocean environmental issues. He's a New York Times best-selling author as well. Today, Paul, feel free to dive in as deep into your background as you want. But
Sure.
Today, he has a new book that he and we would love to talk about. It's called Goodbye, Phone, Hello World. And this is something that's near and dear to my heart and also Thumb's in that as you may or may not know, I wrote a book called Life Scale, which was a journey. Was a very emotional, psychological, and intellectual journey of my research in how to essentially navigate away from the digital addiction and the digital routines and toward a more creative and productive path toward innovation and happiness and all of those things. So, Paul, welcome to Intersections.
Thank you so much. Yeah, no, it's great to be here. And nice to meet you, John, as well.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, no, I'm Brian. I was really glad to see your background in confronting this whole issue of digital addiction. And as you said, in your intro, this is not a native space for me. Like, I'm not a technology guy. I'm known generally, I often say I'm not famous, but I'm fish famous. So in the world of oceans and seafood sustainability, that's the work that I've done. I wrote a book called For Fish that people tend to know me for, in my TED Talk that's built around that book. But what happened to me is that, so I wrote this kind of marine trilogy of books, For Fish, American Catch, and the Omega Principle. That I did over about 10 years. And as I was, spending all this time in Antarctica, the West Coast, South America, looking at all these different fisheries, over 10 years, I noticed that my interviewees, scientists, natural scientists of all kinds, went from, in the first book, looking like this, and then the second book, they were like this, and by the third book, they were like this. And these are the people who are supposed to be observing the natural world, looking in and taking in, reporting to us how the natural world works. So I realized that there was this huge disconnect. And the other thing that was going on was that I have a son who, at the time I started working on Goodbye Phone, Hello World, was 12. And he was about to enter the teenage years. And those of you who are parents out there know that suddenly when your kids approach the teenage years, you're like, oh my God, there is not that much time left to be a dad or a mom. And so I did a little bit of sort of self-inventorying of my behavior. And I realized that, per the report on my iPhone, I was on my phone about 4 to 5 hours a day, which is about the amount of time that most Americans on their phone. If you add that up over the course of a year, that's more than a waking month. And over the decade, so I say that my son was born in 2006 and the iPhone was born in 2007, and they've been competing for my attention ever since. Anyway, over those 12 years that my son was on Earth, I spent a year of it on my phone. And so I wrote this book in a large part as a reaction against that, to try and figure out, A, how could I spend more quality time with actual human interactions, and B, what is the cost of that addiction, both personally and also societally. So that's sort of the book. And also the book has a really fun, you can look through it, you see, and that's the cover. And some people who've bought the book put their iPhone to sleep within this little box. So, anyway, enough show and tell.
What a wonderful introduction, and very powerful. In many ways, I had found that through a different process of discovery, what it means to be present, what it means to be in the moment, and how easy it was to be distracted. Not even, that's another thing that I'll get to in a minute, and I'm going to write that down. One of the challenges I found when I launched the book, but it's powerful in what you say, because essentially it's for the most noble of causes, which is to spend more time with loved ones and to be more present in the world. We don't get that time back. And on that note, before we dive into more questions, Paul, John, did I not get the memo on the color coordination?
This is my. Would you call this a corona, a COVID bandana? In case a delivery comes, I can run out in a moment's notice. So.
I love it. Well, the
CDC says you have to double mask now, so that's
yeah. I'll get a double Dana.
Double Dana. There you go.
Dana, I love it. I was thinking that So the point I wanted to come back to is that when I launched LifeScale, I thought for sure, I absolutely was certain that I wasn't the only one going through this, and to some extent that was true, but not to the scale I thought it would be. Meaning that most people don't necessarily see their phone from the standpoint of an addictive relationship, or that it's a distraction, and that time spent on it, in some ways, is a badge of honor, and that was a cultural issue that I didn't contend with in my marketing initially, and that led to the uphill battle of first trying to sell the idea of this, and then trying to sell the solution. So curious, Paul, what you saw in your research as people. Of course, we know those that would want to read the book, but what was your journey like to get people to read it that didn't know they needed to read it?
Well, it's interesting. So I teach at New York University, and that's actually my heart out at the end of this interview is my class. But so I was spending a lot of time with younger people, and I just always automatically assumed that they loved their phone and that they were millennials and this was part of their lives. But when I started working on the book and I started asking them, would you like to get rid of your phone? I couldn't believe it. Like 90% of the kids in my class said yes. And these are the digital natives. And so I realized to a large degree, it was focusing on the enshackling, the imprisonment that life on the phone all the time means for a lot of people. And I think, Americans love the concept of freedom, right? And so I think that's what initially won us over to the iPhone, was that it was this tremendously freeing thing. We could take our thing everywhere. But what I think people are now just starting to see is that it's tremendously constricting and tremendously interfering in the things that we actually like the most. The other thing, which I don't know if you've come across, both of you guys, is that I think at the advent of the iPhone era and the app era, everyone was just blown away that all these apps were free. Like, oh my God, it's free. I could do my taxes for free. I could do this, that for free. Amazing. But what they didn't realize is that the currency, as we all know, of the attention economy is your attention, and that we were giving moments of our lives away, moment by moment. To the point where I kind of refer to all these tech companies that do this, that harvest our time. I call them moment merchants. They're taking our moments away and selling them to other people. And so I just feel that we need to revalue the moment. It's one of the reasons I start the book with a quote from the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, where he says, "Life can only be lived in the present moment." It's very profound when you think about it. It's like you don't get the moments back. Once you've given them over to a tech company, you don't get them back.
It's probably one of the more profound quotes. I had stumbled upon that as well as I was seeking inspiration for going in this path. And what was interesting is that, I was in a position, Paul, to be completely transparent, where I did not want to give up my relationship with technology.
Yeah,
I wanted to. It's my job.
Yeah, and, clearly, you have a whole studio.
And I needed to take control of it, and I needed to first understand what was I not in control of.
Yeah,
and then ultimately what that was costing me, and
that's
then
interesting.
And then where I wanted to take it. I didn't want to go back to the beginning, but I did want to be better with it. So like an augmentation sort of hypothesis, right? And what I had learned was that there were incredible intellectual, emotional, and psychological costs that no one ever discusses, right? So one thing, it's like our attention, and it's another thing about the moments that it's taking away. But in various research projects that I did, I actually found that it robs you of your self-confidence, your self-esteem. It takes away from your own path of where you, say, for example, saw yourself 10 years from now.
Absolutely.
And also, it does a lot of things that nobody really focuses on. And I wanted to just share some of those lists that those things that had come out of my research, which was it lowers your IQ. It is actually damaging to your brain. It affects your gray matter, which then affects your short-term memory, which then affects your long-term memory. That's right. Makes you more prone to mistakes. It actually hinders intellectual effective processes. It causes stress. And most of all, it leads to increased distractibility, which further perpetuates all of those other things. And that, combined with the emotional aspects of wellness and health, are things that we're paying beyond our attention to these merchants of moments, which I love. And we don't get the returns per se, other than the microdoses of serotonin, dopamine, all of those oxytocin that we get in those moments. And also, they are the same 6 or so chemicals that govern every aspect of how we feel. Happiness, delight, fear, anxiety, in their different levels. And so that's what I realized I needed to take control of. So I'll leave you with this question, John. I want to make sure you get the last bits of our time together. What was it for you that was your most profound growth as a result of writing this book, or maybe a story somebody had that they shared with you after reading it?
Well, certainly I can't discount the improved relationship I had with my partner and with my son. I think that without a doubt, those moments are back to me and we have a greater intimacy. But I like what you said at, when you went down the list of things that get eroded by this kind of addictive behavior, that number one on your list was erosion of confidence. And so I think that my biggest gain was confidence. And weirdly enough, that came with getting rid of Google Maps. And I don't know if you've gone down that road, and I know a lot of people would be afraid, but I think everyone on this call is old enough to remember the time when, remember, you wanted to go to the party on Friday night, and you didn't know where the party is, but you got to the party eventually? Did you have Google Maps? Did you even have a cell phone? You still got to the gosh darn party. And that's just a joking kind of thing. But the other thing that I think is really interesting is that since I gave up Google Maps and I do my own navigation, when I get to a place where I've sort of earned it, there's like this little pat on the back of like, you got there. Interesting. And I realized that there's so many things that the phone takes away, these little moments of achievement that you've outsourced to the phone. So reclaiming those little moments of achievement has in fact boosted my confidence. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's sort of my thinking.
It is one of many things of which we can all take pride in, the steps that we take towards the things that make us feel better in whatever way that is. I'm old enough to remember Thompson's guide and having to use paper maps for local discovery. Yeah. John, over to you.
Well, there's so much to talk about. Actually, I chair a company that's in the ocean surveillance area. So fish.
Oh, great!
Is something I'd love to talk with you about on another.
Yeah, happy to come again.
Great. Well, I think that's a great idea. What's the headline in terms of why these devices are addictive and what the detox regimen is, and is there a quote unquote safe way to address or to connect with technology? Not everybody who has alcohol in their kitchen is an alcoholic. And there are sociable ways of using addictive substances of other kinds as well, CBD and all of that kind of stuff.
Fair point.
And given the fact that this tidal wave of technology is an inevitability, as Kevin Kelly would say, somebody talked about AR, VR headsets. Apple's got this, virtual reality, that's what AirPod Pro, whatever they're called now, the headphones are. But we're just, Steve Jobs supposedly figured out TV, which in a sense is bringing all this data without the clumsiness of a device right to our retinas.
Yeah.
It's not going to go away. So what's the source of the addiction? What's your recommendation about detox? And is there a quote unquote healthy way to connect to the technology?
Excellent questions. I think that the biggest hold and why I focus on the phone and not just the computer, is that there is complete seamlessness between your desktop environment and your phone environment, such that you can go through all 18 hours of your waking life, your waking day, without ever leaving the virtual space. So the first, I think, step in detoxing is to guarantee that every day you have a time in which you are not occupying a screen-based environment. People have different ways of doing it. For me, the most important thing has been getting the phone out of the bedroom and to have a different ritual for the morning that includes meditation, that includes quiet writing time on paper, that includes reading on paper, which I'm sure your research has shown, Brian, is very, very conducive to mental health and to better focus and better attention. So those are some, preliminary things. Frankly, there are quite a few suggestions in the book, as there are in Brian's great book. But I think number one is giving real reality its place so that you are not part of this hermetic environment that is, in fact, engineered for you to keep you forever clicking, forever engaged, and forever kind of keeping those dopamine levels at an unrealistically high level.
Well, okay, so are we saying then that there is a healthy or adult way of relating to the technologies that you're describing? And if there's a way to kind of keep it in perspective, or to be an adult about using alcohol, as a metaphor, what does that look like?
Well, I think it involves prioritizing human-to-human direct relationships, but I also think it involves the buy-in from our society overall. Like, I think just as restaurants had got rid of smoking, or at the very least had smoking sections, I think restaurants should have policies about phones at the table. I mean, some restaurants do. I think that families need to have rules about it. I think that phones shouldn't be at the table. I think that technology shouldn't be at meal times. So those are some, examples of some responsible behavior. I think that, when we have the opportunity to have human-to-human connection in a direct way, which involves face and voice, okay, sometimes it might happen over FaceTime. But if we just keep in the back of our minds that the priority is as human an interaction as possible to have, I think that's an adult way of doing things. I realize that during these COVIDian times, right, the possibilities of that are hard, but
back against us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and to use another cheeseball phrase that came to me the other day, I kind of think of this book as a screen vaccine. So, we're going to come out of COVID. I think we will in a few months. Maybe it's going to take more than just a few months, but we're going to come out, and we need to remember that we need to be able to touch each other. We need to be able to be in the same space with each other. We can't let technology reinforce this human separation that at the moment we have to live through. We have to figure out a way back to each other going.
Right. It's just that there's a big knowing doing gap. I mean, if you look at the biology of addictions, you can do all the cognitive behavioral therapy and, kind of rational argument you want, but, people are still going to reach for that, crack cocaine or, the.
Well, I mean, that's frankly why, I switched to a flip phone, and I know that I have an addictive personality and I couldn't handle it, and what's interesting to note is that all the arguments of the technology world that you're, going to lose money, you're going to lose connection to this, I actually made more money once I got rid of my smartphone, precisely because of another thing that Brian, you raised, which is that you make mistakes when you're quick responding. I think I had more thoughtful responses, and I think I did better overall. But John, to your point, I think we need to hardwire in physical stops to those environments. I don't know how we do it. It certainly could happen legislatively in schools. I don't think that middle schoolers should be allowed to be, middle and lower schoolers should be allowed to have smartphones, at least without some media literacy education. I think that we need to create perhaps some societally enforced hard stops.
You're going to be a very popular guy.
Well,
those policies.
I've ridden the wave of unpopularity from my throughout my writing career. Used to be nobody wanted to talk about fish, but now we're all talking about fish as part of a key
fish are where it's at.
That's right. Yeah. Hey guys, I think I got to hop off, but it was really nice speaking with you. And John, I'd love to come back and talk about ocean stuff because there is really cool stuff happening in so many. Sorry to say, but on the digital level as well as the real level. So let's manage to catch up.
Well aware. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Bye, Paul. Thank you. What a fascinating conversation, and this is a topic that, in all honesty, needs more and more attention. Especially since, as we've brought up before, Social Dilemma on Netflix has done more for awareness around this topic than anything that Paul or I have done in our own marketing of the book. Others include Nir Eyal, who wrote the book Indistractable. There's also Cal Newport, who wrote Digital Minimalism. And it's an important conversation. The other thing too, John, is I wanted to answer your question before we bring up our next guest, John Reed. When I went through the life scale journey, what would ultimately be the book, I'd found through my research all of the things that caused us to get to where we were. What I could not find was how to fix it.
The remedy,
what to do about it. And so what I ended up doing was borrowing from essentially psychological and wellness programs, and then also addiction treatments. And a lot of that turned out to be exactly what I needed. And what I needed was, to your question, or to your point about alcohol. Many people, like myself, have champagne here in the fridge, but that doesn't necessarily make me an alcoholic. And you learn how and to enjoy it and how to appreciate it, and when it can help you in whatever you're doing. For example, in my case, when I need that little extra fizz of creativity. Right. But the point is that exercise actually helps you define what those boundaries are, and also what those aspirations need to be, and then the role that technology then plays in helping you get there. So you use it much more intentionally and purposefully. And that's powerful. It's powerful. And that's the one thing that we don't get enough chance to talk about yet, is sort of the, because you are literally battling a chemical dependency on how you feel when you use those devices in those microbursts. And that's hopefully, maybe we could have a deeper conversation on that, because I don't want to take any time away from our next guest, who is someone, to be completely honest with you, is a friend. I guess we could say that almost about everybody that joins, right, John? He's a longtime friend. He's also just a raconteur. He's someone that I admire in the way that he thinks and the way that he approaches conversations. And I think the last time I saw him was November 2019 at Sam's Chowder House in Half Moon Bay. Well, John Reed, I'll bring him up here in a second. He is the co-founder of Diginomica, co-founder of Enterprise Irregulars. He is purveyor of all things media and not just enterprise, but just technology in general. And he is constantly sharing his awesome ideas across the board. And we wanted to bring him up to talk about a point he made in the comments section of a previous episode in 2020 around digital and artistry, and what that future roadmap looks like now that we've seen all things related to art and creativity and entertainment disrupted as a result of the pandemic. And knowing, or assuming, whichever side you want to take, I'm going to go with the knowing that the world is going to be absolutely different in the post-pandemic economy, and that we're going to see a lot of these traditional industries have to evolve. And with that, let's bring up John. How you doing, my man?
Hey guys, it's nice to be on a show with some real production values.
This is the new production value. It's the new standard.
It's not my standard, but I'm totally impressed. No, I really appreciate it. I have my own live video show, which is totally different, and the production values are not there. But in a couple hours, I'm doing this thing on supply chain disruptions, and I'm all about like just jugular conversations. And actually, I give you guys a ton of credit, because you brought me onto the show because I was giving you shit during a show, which I'm really you're very gracious. You're very gracious. I feel really strongly about the creative economy as a topic. My message is 1/2 inspiration and 1/2 sobering wake-up call. And I'd like to really touch on both if that's possible. So I'll leave it to you as to how you want me to stack this up.
All right, so I think we're going to have this game plan play out in real time. John, let's have you lead this conversation. Bring me in as you see fit, but I want to just tee it up with one thing, and that is, John, why don't you share with everybody what it was that inspired you to share what you shared, and how that correlates to what you're working on, and we'll kind of use that as the stepping off point.
All right. Well, the first thing is I'm pretty emotional about the topic of creativity, because before I was an enterprise guy, where I started in 95, I was an artist. And, so many things in your show are resonating with me, because I grew up in an alcoholic family, and I started creating and writing as a way of coping with some of those issues in my life. So I became very passionate about the power of creativity, but then I also got a very tough firsthand look at the challenge of the creative economy as well. And what I think set me off in your show, which in not a bad way, but in a good way, your guest was really good, but I picked up on a little bit of residue of stuff that gets my dander up around this. What it comes down to is this. We can idealize disruption, and sometimes disruption has negative consequences that are not easily remedied. And in the case of creative work, that's very much the case. And I'm almost done with the book on artists navigating the creative economy. And one of the points I look at in that book is this issue of how disruption has made things more difficult for artists. Now, that's not true across the board, because there's some very good things that have happened as a result of these disruptions also. But it's a problematic concept. And unfortunately, Silicon Valley, I think, sometimes idealizes it. Just to give you a classic example, I don't think Craigslist had any intention of devastating local newspapers when they set up their classified ad network, right? But that was the consequence. And we were told that citizen journalism was going to emerge and be this amazing force, and it simply has not been. So that's just one example of why we have to problematize these concepts and figure out how we're going to support people who are in these transitions. And to your point, the pandemic has made things more difficult, but the things I'm getting at were in play before the pandemic. But certainly when you look at, for example, like creative industries like music, obviously artists were really trying to fall back on live performances as a key component of how they got by. And that's been, temporarily disrupted by the pandemic, though I do think eventually live music is going to come back. So I can walk you through a few of the more negative things, but then I can also tell you about why I think there's such an incredible opportunity for folks to move into more creative worlds. And it ties directly into your last guest, because detox, I would argue, is just the first step. Detox set the stage for what I call solitude as a competitive advantage, or how by immersing yourself in a creative cycle, you can transform your career and potentially your company.
Well, it would be great to get a little bit more of an executive summary, or just, a summary of your thinking about how this is actually affecting various art forms, and what your kind of what your take-home message is. I mean, if this is the case, I mean, if we can agree on the theory of the case in terms of what's going on, what are the implications? What are the implications for artists? What are the implications for people running large technology companies that create these platforms, for producers, for entrepreneurs? What should we be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, there's winners and losers in all of this, and we probably can't slice and dice all of it in one 30-minute segment. But what I can tell you is some of the dynamics that are more difficult are that across many creative industries in the last 15 years, we've seen what you might call a vanishing middle class. So in other words, there's huge winners, and then there's a bunch of people scraping by. A lot of those people that are scraping by have gotten plugged into the so-called gig economy through various platforms and aggregate platforms for work and content. Those platforms are not a really good way to live for the most part. And so that creates challenges in and of themselves. One of the core challenges is the declining perceived value in intellectual property. People in general like to consume information for free and often feel entitled to it. There's a lack of respect for copyright. Now, one of the good news aspects of this is what we've seen in the last 5 years is people actually are willing to pay for stuff in large part. But what they're looking for is what I've sometimes called frictionless micropayments. But it's a wonky phrase. But the point is, they like platforms where things are convenient for them to consume. So when you look at things like Netflix or even Patreon or what have you, there's opportunities there. It depends on the platform, which is why this is a complicated conversation. So, for example, I know some artists that are doing pretty well on Patreon, doing various kinds of subscription programs. I don't know many artists doing well on Spotify, and it has to do with the differences in how royalties are distributed on these various platforms and how you make money. The other interesting specter that I'll touch on as well in a little bit is the role of AI in all of this, because I was very, very dismissive about whether AI could really impact real creative work. I still don't think it can in the traditional sense, but I do think there's a little bit of a specter there that has to be reckoned with also. But for the most part, it depends on where you land on this, because if you're a content aggregator, then these are good days for you, because aggregating content is good business. Netflix is doing very well. But you have to understand where I'm coming from on this was where I grew up on certain forms of immersive art. Like I remember when the Pink Floyd's The Wall came out and I went to my best friend's house and opened up this gatefold sleeve. We turned out all the lights and listened to this transformative piece of art. And I just want people to have that opportunity in their lives and to have that kind of art created. And there's not as much of an economy for investing in that type of immersive creative work as there once was. This doesn't mean it's gone away, but when you look at different pockets of creative work, some are more threatened than others. And unfortunately, some of the ones that are threatened are really important, like, for example, in-depth investigative journalism. There's less of an economy for that. It's not entirely true because there's some long-form stuff going on. But anyway, I just think we have to be respectful of the fact that sometimes when things are disrupted, there's not always a happy ending to come out right away. Sometimes it takes some time to figure out what the good aspect is.
Well, so there's so many things to follow up on here. I guess one basic question I'd have for you, if you're a young, talented musician or fine artist or writer, of which there are many. I mean, I have a number of friends who are, I would say, at the cutting edge of jazz, and this is people in their 30s, who are really picking up the banner and running with it. And I'm intimately familiar with their economic challenges. I mean, are we moving into an era where, which is going to be far less hospitable for artists to be able to make a career out of their art? I mean, it's one thing to, sit at home and, get on the piano and compose some tunes and have fun doing it, and jam with other people using Jack Tripp and have a musically satisfying experience. It's another thing to be a card-carrying artist who has burned their boats in terms of a job on Wall Street or whatever, and is really doing it for real. So are we heading into an environment where there may be just as much quote unquote art made, but the notion of art as your profession or your calling is going to be exponentially difficult? So it'll be even more of the kind of blockbuster syndrome, people at the top, and then everybody else kind of barely making a living, and with people like Spotify being real villains in this story, I would argue.
Absolutely. Great question, John. And that's a big point about what my upcoming book is about. There's another book called Death of an Artist that's come out that really lays a fairly grim and sobering picture of all of this. I'll give you the author's name in a moment. I recommend the book. My book is this William Deresiewicz. Hopefully I didn't butcher his last name. I probably did. My book is intended to be a little more practical and inspirational in the sense that I want to take a hard look at this and provide some tactics and some things that work. But to your point, John, yeah, I think it is going to be exponentially more difficult for artists who really want to immerse themselves in their art and have really kind of made a conscious break from what you might call business materialism or whatever. I mean, when you think about the classic old days of rock and roll, for example, folks like Bob Dylan, they didn't really stress the business side too much. Their handlers handled that, and they focused more on their creative work, and that was kind of how it went. These days, an artist can't really mostly do that. I mean, mostly you have to wear all the hats and be willing to wear all those hats if you want to make something happen. I mean, I think we will have a ton of content to consume, but the question becomes, is it truly transformative content that helps us better understand our identities and our circumstance, or is it just mildly entertaining content? I mean, there's so much consumable crap out there, but I would argue that while it might have a disposable entertainment value, I don't think it has the power to change lives. And I keep looking for new content that meets that criteria. For the most part, it's not there, aside from the renaissance around serialized dramas that happened with The Sopranos and stuff like that, which was truly an inspiring medium for a period of time there. But anyway, the point being, like, there are things artists can do. I mean, obviously, don't quit your day job is a key piece of advice for a lot of artists right now. But there are things you can do, in the sense that one of the practical pieces of advice I give in my book is look to build an audience first, and then worry about how you can potentially monetize in various ways. And that might sound like a simple perspective, but for a lot of artists, they really want to charge for their stuff. And the problem with charging for your stuff is that you're putting up walls between you and a potential audience. So some of this becomes tactical. And one of the things I had to really let go of in order to achieve more creative success was this notion of charging for my content. And I began to appreciate that that the power of digital in many ways is the power of free. Now, free isn't always no strings attached. Sometimes with free, you're asking people to sign up, for example, and maybe you can build a nice big email list that way, or a database that can become future prospects. And there are some really neat things you can do. Like, I have a friend who makes a really good living selling genre fiction on Amazon. And there are other artists that have done that. So there are some really cool examples, but a lot of it comes down to figuring out how to build audiences first and then figuring out how to monetize. And that's a big conceptual change for a lot of artists.
Well, it also begs the question of, how to pay for groceries and things like that. I want to link what you're saying now to something you said a few minutes ago, which is the question of the specter of AI, because, I can easily see that algorithmic thinking in marketing and even cycling back to development of shows, I would be stunned if, the big players in motion media aren't thinking about how to create an even more efficient linkage between what they want to produce and what the audience as an aggregate wants to consume. But what I would be concerned about in that instance is that you're trimming off all of the outliers and all of the kind of messy stuff at the edges that are actually, you could argue, the most interesting and authentic artistic activities, and that you're basically going to have smooth jazz and rom-coms, and it's going to be like Fahrenheit 451, where everything will be dumbed down and very saleable and consumable, but it won't really be art, or it'll be commercial art. It won't be art. I wonder what you think about that, and how it relates to your comment about AI.
Absolutely. And Timo, I saw your GPT-3 comment, a text generation engine. I'm going to get to GPT-3 in a few minutes here. But to answer John's comment first, yes, you're absolutely right, because I think used the wrong way, AI is just going to reinforce all of the vacant focus group tendencies that have created such stale entertainment and predictable entertainment. And one of the biggest problems that ties into that is this notion of franchising, that every creative concept has to have a predictable franchise with a predictable brand. The Batmans or the Spider-Mans that you go back to again and again and again to the well again and again. And most great creative work is one-off. I mean, Moby Dick, To Kill a Mockingbird. You think those people how would Moby Dick have done in an AI engine? If the Beatles were recording the medley for Abbey Road, the AI engine would have said, you can never sell that medley. That's a piece of junk. Like, get that out. And it became one of the most important compositions in modern music. So yeah, I think that kind of dumbing down is a big part of the problem. And unfortunately, AI can contribute directly to that. Now, I think there are some cool things too. I mean, when you look at the advantages of, say, I'm a solo songwriter, I can play a little guitar. I can maybe use some of those same tools to create a band around me when I'm sitting in isolation. So a lot of times these narratives have more than one direction, right? So you can't go all negative. You can't go all positive. What I like is the thoughtful conversations where we have no sacred cows and we don't idealize these technologies.
Hey, Brian, maybe it's a good segue here to throw over to you. I mean, I think there's tons to talk about here.
Whole page of notes, or digital page of notes, I guess. But John, before we do, did you want to get Timo's comment addressed?
Yeah, you wanted to say something.
Well, I should comment on GPT-3 because there was a whole lot of hype around GPT-3. I thought it was a little manipulative the way The Guardian did it, because they published this essay that was supposed to scare us about how good GPT-3 was at composing an essay. But in fact, it was a curated collection of pieces from a number of different essays cobbled together by human editors. It was hardly an AI writing a compelling essay. I've been pretty dismissive about the impact of AI on creative work. In fact, I've kind of said that that's one of the toughest things for robots to do, is to actually create on the same level that humans can create. There has been some stuff of, like, there was one thing around, this AI can create a free-form guitar solo that sounds like Frank Zappa. And I was like, that is so disrespectful to Frank Zappa. Like, if you would say that, you have no idea of what Zappa was all about or what Zappa fans care about, because there's no way they're going to get fooled by a soulless like AI imitation. But one thing I do want to mention is there was a very interesting article that I totally trashed on Twitter feed, but it was actually kind of an important article. It was billed as AI is on the verge of mastering the creative arts, which is obviously totally bullshit. And it had a phrase saying, thanks to developments in AI, the days of the human creative may be numbered. And I said it was a ridiculous piece of AI hype. Now, this piece came out on Tech Radar, but actually what was so interesting when I spent a little more time with it is about halfway through the article, there's a section that says, what is quality anyway? This gets directly back to Timo's comment about GPT-3. It says, as the influence expands, content quality, the way it's judged is going to change. And they make the case here that snackable content more likely to generate impressions takes precedence over in-depth reporting. Hyperbolic headlines outperform purely descriptive ones. And the gist of it is this, that if reader engagement becomes the proxy for quality, and if you take it like that, I could see an AI engine putting out a paragraph of snackable content. It's easy to create sensationalized crap that gets so-called engagement. The problem with that is what we saw in the last election cycle, where engaging people in the wrong way and emotionalizing their responses is actually quite dangerous. And to claim that is successful is very dangerous as well. But I think it is interesting because I absolutely think that AI could create these so-called snackable moments of content. And someone today just sent me an email about creating 30-second videos using AI. And I actually responded to that tweet. And what I said was, I'm not a fan of snackable content. I wish you luck, but I'm dedicated to proving in-depth, immersive, and interactive content is still indispensable. We aren't going to fix technology projects or our vexing social problems with 30-second snacks.
Man, all right. So I don't even know where to start, John. So many awesome things we can talk about. I do appreciate your perspective. And so if you have a pen and paper, I'm going to just throw a bunch of things out and address them at will.
Okay.
Because I feel like I'm going to get one shot at asking a question before we run out of time. So there's an arc to this. I see so much creativity in the world, and I actually believe that creativity is a beacon of light in a future of AI and tech hype. That human creativity is probably more important than it's ever been, and that we all need to rekindle the artist formerly known as our youth in order to practice more creativity in all of our lives, in all aspects. And that was a big part of why I wrote Life Scale, which was to unlock and unleash that creativity with purpose. And so much of what I see, though, is actually giving the semblance of creativity, but it's actually robbing you of it. So, for example, like TikTok and everything being a challenge. And for the most part, everyone feeling that the confusing self-expression with creativity. So just because I participated in this challenge means that I am creative. When in fact, when you see something creative, like, for example, how Alexis Gay transformed her Twitter feed from actually being at Patreon into becoming a full-time comedian, or Sarah Cooper, as a result of transforming her Instagram and Twitter feed into becoming a professional comedian celebrity now with her Donald Trump impressions. And you set that up then, and you see of a future where, for example, AI doesn't have to be used for creativity. AI could be used for discovery and finding ways to sort of emerge new art forms and traditional art forms by knowing you and your patterns and your tastes, and maybe introducing you to areas that might push you around those boundaries. And then you have movements like live commerce, which we're going to start to see playing out. So there's nothing that would stop us from generating revenue at this show if you like the conversations and you want to fund it, for example, or Substack, or things like what Twitter's building right now, which is a content revenue generating machine for its users. And I'm lastly going to just tee it up here then, John. I'm going to try to show you something. Then the question becomes with, okay, there's the creativity we know, and there's this world that's crashing in on us as whether we want it or not, like AI, bad AI, machine learning, deep learning. And what does that mean for moving forward? And then you have essentially the question of what is artistry then, right? Because the human condition, that artist within, is only going to prevail if it wants to. And I found this. I'm going to try to show it to you. I found this, and I was just so struck by it. And it is her name is Anna Dreambrush, and she paints in virtual reality. And I could imagine all of those things, like live commerce, a new medium like virtual reality, and this being performance art in a way where I could pay to be part of this process and watch this come to life through my Oculus, for example. And it gets me to then see that the promise of creativity and technology is wonderful if we let it. And so what I'd love to hear, thank you for allowing me to kind of set this all up. What I'd love to hear from you then is, how do we take this conversation and shift it into a much more productive and creative format where we're not debating one another about all the bullshit that is just technology for the sake of technology, but actually building upon it where creative as it was and creative as it will be becomes this new forefront for commerce where artists get to thrive again, not just in their artistry, but also financially or however it is that they define success.
I'm so glad you asked that, Brian. And let's close the show on some inspirational notes for my segment here, because you're totally right. And look, there's so many AI tools that can help us with our art as well. Like I'm putting my creative economy book through Grammarly right now, and it's incredibly helpful. Otter AI has been huge for me on the transcription side. So there's great tools you can use. But this is more than a tool conversation. And we can define art in many ways, but in my mind, the core definition is that you take a courageous excavation inside yourself and find the things that resonate and the talents you might have, and create a discipline towards mastery to experiment and pursue those talents in a way that gives expression to the world, your unique point of view. Now, you might say, well, there's some fun disposable art that might not fit that description. That's probably true. But, even a disposable pop song like a Billie Jean or a Boys of Summer by Don Henley do reflect a deeper process of creativity. And we can all undertake that in our own way. And I don't think it's limited to so-called brilliant artists. I think we can all do it. And one thing I tell people about social media is you're going to the party too soon. Go to the social media party after you've done this work and created meaningful, immersive content that matters to you. And it's a cycle of deep work. And it's so funny you mentioned Cal Newport, because he's the one that pioneered that concept. I encourage folks to check out his stuff. I borrowed heavily from it. I've written about it on Diginomica. You can do a search for it if you want. But there's a whole process I've defined around deep work that involves reflection, research, curation, which you can begin to share publicly, and then your own creative process. And you can actually differentiate yourself from others who haven't undertaken that quest. And to your point, Brian, you can use new ways of displaying that content and sharing that content and consuming that content, whether it's virtual reality or experimenting with new platforms or distributing your short stories directly to your email subscribers. There's so many different ways you can experiment. And that's the exciting part of all of this. And yes, organizations can fund and support this too. And so there's many ways to move forward with this. I did a piece on how Deep Work Models, the software company, was using that to support programmers who really need that immersive time. So this kind of ties in with your whole detox theme you had earlier, which is, okay, now that we've created some silence, let's do something with that silence. Let's do something that changes our lives and hopefully changes our company's futures as well. So to me, that's the really inspiring part of this whole story, is how there's an opportunity now to step away from that and not get totally sucked in.
Yes. What a wonderful way to end that, John. So when do we get to see your work? When are you planning on releasing it?
Good question. I'm not sure. I'm promising sometime in 2020. I have this little day job on Diginomica that keeps me kind of busy. That's my company and my pride and joy, with my colleagues. So that's my main gig. But sometime this year, I'll get this book out. I spent a lot of time talking with young people, and I really want this book to be an inspiration to them to go on this creative journey and not to be discouraged by what they might perceive as the odds stacked against them, because it's a journey that changes your life. And one of the biggest things, Brian, that I think is so important is that you don't have to have a massive commercial success to change your life creatively. I don't know if you guys have had this experience, but you can share a piece of authentic creativity with 5 other people, and if it changes their lives, that will change your life. And I've had situations like that happen to me. And so you don't have to succeed on a massive scale to have incredible rewards by taking the risks of finding your own authentic voice in this world. And on another level, if you check on my B2B marketing content, it's about establishing topic authority as well, but that's a whole nother discussion. I really appreciate you having me on. I had a blast. Your show's great.
Yeah, John, thank you. Thank you. Always love plugging into your brain for those moments. So appreciate it. And I'll see you at some industry stuff, I'm sure.
Looking forward to our next transformation debate, Brian. Those are always fun.
They are. I'm always looking forward to time with you. Thank you, John. So, Mr. KO, wow. Good times. We've lost Gregarious here. And so the one weakness that I have in the production here, there we go, is understanding all of the different controls before us. But I did figure that one out. I do miss the other studio, John. I will tell you, I don't have my switcher. I have all of the gear here, but I just haven't had time to set it up because I felt like we could have shown Mr. Reed true production value as we're learning to be more creative. As always, my friend, this has been just an invigorating conversation, and I again always learn and feel like I can write 50,000 articles as a result of each one of these conversations. John, how about you? How are you feeling today?
Good. I think the two conversations stitched together really well. I mean, we knew that they'd be an interesting juxtaposition, but I think really delving into two very obviously creative people who've thought a lot about the context within which creativity operates. I think there was a lot to kind of cross-link and to create, to use the term, intersections of thought. So it's very satisfying.
A very, very awesome summary. Very clever as well. Everybody, to all those who tuned in, thank you so much for your time and attention. We know that it's finite. We don't mind that you're multitasking. We just love and appreciate that you're here. We're going to build out a newsletter here, so please do subscribe to it. If you want to catch past episodes, which I actually find myself doing this as well. We have a home for those episodes at intersectionslive.com. Make sure to follow John and myself online and our work. And basically, he's at John KO and I'm at Brian Solis across the socials. Please do feel free to reach out at any time. We'll be back next Thursday at 10:30 Pacific. As always, we're working on a couple of special episodes to bring on important guests that we haven't been able to get to yet. And John, why don't you maybe send us out with some parting words?
Well, I'd like to point out that today is Chinese New Year's Eve, and we're heading into the Year of the Ox, which starts Friday. So the Year of the Ox is a really good year. Not all of the years in the Chinese zodiac are good, by the way. So we'll have to take advantage of the opportunity for more slow but deliberate and steady progress, which is what the Year of the Ox promises us. So happy almost New Year, everybody.
Yeah, happy almost New Year. Wow, wonderful. And I guess when we're back, it will be Happy New Year.
Indeed.
John, always a pleasure. I'll see you on the other side.